Tripod. But we were at the event and I finished super late. Back chat. We couldn't. How late did we get it? No, but that's what's super interesting. Yeah, these are personal things. We have more work. Probably at the same time we go live because it's 10 already, and then put up the live review, put up loop. I might need to, I was now thinking of a new graphic that I could potentially get. This is only 8. You took the graphics off with this? The graphics off with this? Like in the thing? You have the previous I think after long like a year I'll do NGC.
So here's the thing. If we start with this line, just improve it as we go along, right? Fine. So let's just, what do we have for now?
I don't have to. I don't have it.
And what we not really have.
It means that you need to see what it does.
Right, so
No,
that's
I have it. I mean, three. It is. So I had a main one.
And then you have the other one.
Right. So I have the main one I have is flow, and then I have hashtag description. Flow and then you just forgot about it.
And keep it flow as a client server.
So NGC.
Yeah. And you get it up.
That's the screen?
Yeah.
So send that. Okay. And so the next one.
Yeah, that's fine.
But it is.
You don't need anything.
I said it right there.
Right, all good?
Yeah.
Okay, good morning everyone. It's Thursday morning, second day of the 2018 NGC Bocas Lit Fest. As usual, I hope you've all been getting lots of sleep and taking your vitamins and drinking lots of coffee because we have 4 action-packed days ahead of us and we're about to get today's started. So the first thing is just to say welcome to everyone. This is our first event at the festival in the old fire station, this historic building, which as you know is our main venue at the festival. It's the big room. And we're glad that we're starting it off this morning with such an important conversation and such interesting and expert speakers. About what this event is and why we're doing it, but I think most of you already know because you're here in the audience. We're going to have a conversation called Island Futures. I don't mean futures in the kind of stock market kind of sense, which I don't know anything about. We're not talking about the future, we're talking about possible futures. That's why it's in the plural. So all through this year's festival, as you'll have noticed from the program, we've got a series of events that look at the particular circumstances and predicaments and possibilities of small islands, like most of our Caribbean countries, but also like countries in the Pacific, in the Mediterranean, in the Indian Ocean, and so on. And we're looking at those questions from lots of points of views, from a literary and a cultural point of view, from the point of view of economics and sustainability and development and the environment and everything. As always, Bocas is a festival of ideas as much as everything else. So we're starting this morning with what we think is a really crucial conversation about possible futures for island countries like ours. And in a moment, we'll tell you a bit about, well, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to let our very capable chair introduce the other members of the panel this morning. But just to let you know that there's one panelist who you might notice is not here. We're very sorry he couldn't make it. That's Mark Loquan, the president of NGC. Unfortunately, when you're the president of NGC, sometimes you get summoned by the Prime Minister, and you can't say no. So he sends his regrets. We're sorry he's not here. But we're grateful, as always, to NGC for their sponsorship of the festival. We couldn't do this without them. And we know we're going to have an amazing conversation even without him. So the person who's going to very ably manage the conversation this morning, right here to my right, is Vicki Assevero, known to many of you in the audience. She is I'm going to read her official biography because it's so impressive. She is a senior legal counsel, consultant on transactional mediation, and social entrepreneur with a long-standing interest in sustainable development. And I think what a lot of people know her for these days is that she founded the Green Market in Santa Cruz, which has been a really important initiative for local farmers, producers, people interested in turning our economy around. She will introduce the other speakers, but before we hear from them, because this is, after all, a literature festival, we thought that we should begin this morning with some literature, with a poem. And because the whole question of the future for all of us is really a question for people younger than any of us on stage to answer, we thought we'd start with a young poet. So I would like you in a moment to welcome Deneka Thomas, who is well known as one of our best young spoken word poets with a particular interest in some very serious social issues around gender, around the environment. She's going to give us what we're calling a wake-up poem this morning. So if anyone hasn't had enough coffee, this performance is going to wake you up and get you ready to listen to this conversation. And as always, there'll be time for all of you in the audience to ask questions, to join the conversation. So, make notes of all the wonderful ideas and provocations that come into your head so that you can join the conversation a bit later on. But first, to get things started, let's give Deneka a big round of applause to welcome her and all the other panelists.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So the name of this piece is called Magicians. Once upon a time, there were these magicians. I was told that on the 6th day of creation, they were made from dust, given the earth as a gift for existing, and told to go forth and make magic. Can you imagine being given an entire planet? They were supposed to make it a better place, supposed to maintain and enhance its beauty, bring smiles to a crowd of 7 billion faces, live in harmony with all of the organisms that existed in that space. And I guess they did for some time. But my mother had a line, she said all the time, she said, all good things started hot and sweaty, but people never followed through. And according to this story, it must be true. See, these magicians, humbled, curious, innocent, started simple. So they moved from traveling on the backs of donkeys to soaring heaven in their flying machines in their hands. The world would become smaller. They would light up the night sky with artificial stars in the absence of the sun, cure the sick with science, walk on the moon in suits made of breaths. And in the same breath, they would leach the land of her lustre, turn oceans into acid, transfuse every last bit of her blood into their vehicles, exhaust the sky with their exhaust, and as if that isn't enough, they will leak all the moisture from her eyes so that the king tides brimming behind her eyelids come out in the form of deserts. And when they're finished, they will sit on their thrones and watch as the world crumbled into nothing. Can you imagine having all that power and being nothing but parasite, having the world try to shake itself free of you, having the rain force feed itself to fields, having hurricanes hurry themselves into the stomachs of the thirsty, having the sea submerge cities in warm hugs? How long do you think a drowning village can hold its breath for? See, these magicians can turn cool icelands into burning infernos. Isn't it magical? How by the year 2050, some islands like Trinidad and Tobago will cease to exist? Isn't it magical? How their greatest disappearing act will be how they will make entire islands go extinct? Isn't it magical? How the actions of these magicians can demolish an entire planet, and they'll do it for profit. And because of them, one day we'll all have to flee our homes like wildlife running out of a burning forest. And when the last tree is cut, when the last river is polluted, when the last bit of fresh air is respired, when we've used up everything and made the land ugly and uninhabitable, maybe then those magicians would use their magic to reverse the damage that they've done. Or maybe it will be too late. Or maybe we will all live happily ever after. Thank you.
And everyone, in case you don't already know this, if you want some more of that kind of amazing stuff, the National Poetry Slam Finals are on Sunday night. It's the grand finale of the festival. And this is exactly the kind of power that you get there. So Deneka ended with the idea of happy endings, I think. Our happy ending, or actually happy beginning, is that I just told you that that Mark Loquan, NGC President, was not able to join us, and he's miraculously appeared at the back of the room. So he can join us. So give that a round of applause. And what we're going to have to do is we just need to reconfigure the stage slightly so we can fit on it. So you give us a moment, and we'll get things started.
So let me... Right. Okay. Let me go... Excited to have all these wonderful people up here. Mark, thanks for making it in. That's great. He will help me with my pun about creative energy. So Mark Loquan is the head, president, CEO, National Gas Company of Trinidad. I'm sorry? Yes, CEO. Yes, okay, let me get it correct. I was going to get everybody to introduce themselves, but President, National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago, all the same, and a very generous supporter of this very important festival for many years. And so for that, he deserves a great deal of praise, as does the company, very forward-thinking. Alexander Girvan is next to him, and Alexander is an environmental economist. He is currently working with the ACS, Association of Caribbean States. Next to him, Sharifa Ali, who is the Assistant Resident Representative of the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, and a socio-economist. Now, that's as opposed to a political economist. We have a lot of new fields these days that merge disciplines. And very pleased to be sitting next to Philip Nanton, whose book, Frontiers of the Caribbean, is a real inspiration for this panel. He takes many disciplines and has put them together. He's a writer and a sociologist, and has given us a new way of thinking about global change. So it's very exciting to have all these people here. I'm going to be moderating this panel. We're going to try to have a conversation as opposed to a state of lectures and comments towards you. And I'm going to start out by asking each one to tell me one word, or a string of words, I will not be so rigid, that when I say Caribbean island state of mind, Caribbean islands, what do you think of, Mark?
I guess I get to go first for coming late. So I think of talent. And the reason why I think of that is that even though we come from a very tiny island, from my energy perspective, I get to meet, fortunately, a lot of people around the world. Global outreach in Africa and in many other places regionally. And there's always a Trinidadian or some Caribbean person that has, they're in senior positions, they're in highly technical, specialized positions, and they're all over the world in some of the top facilities that I've seen and I've met, right? Even in Angola, where they had a brand new LNG plant built there, the people who were training the people were people from Atlantic LNG, Trinidadians. So from a global standpoint, I see that. From the world of Pan and music and so on, which I've been involved in for many years, I also meet a lot of people in steel band across all over the world. And here's our instrument that has been widely accepted across the globe outside of Trinidad. So even though we come from a small island, here it is that we're having so much impact outside. So talent comes to mind.
Very good, very interesting. Alexander.
To be very honest, I'm going to parallel what you said, and in this regard, going first is an advantage. My word would be disproportionate, and it echoes what you're saying. We're 6 million people in the islands, which is really a tiny fraction of the global population, but our impact in the world's metropoles is really quite significant. The biggest festival in London is Caribbean-inspired, Notting Hill. The language of Toronto is influenced by Jamaica and the Caribbean. If you look at New York, its fabric is influenced by Caribbean people. So really and truly, when you consider that we're only 6 million people in the world, but if you were to go to these metropoles, they would struggle to describe the features of a country like Indonesia or Pakistan, which is a population of well over 100 million people. It's quite spectacular what our impact is on a global scale, so my word would be disproportionate.
Disproportionate impact, I would add.
Disproportionate impact.
Yes, Sharifa.
So my word is possibilities, and I heard the chairperson earlier talking about possibilities, limitless possibilities. And I'm inspired by this after a conversation with my 16-year-old daughter, who told me, "Mom, I'm having an existentialist crisis." I said, "What? Don't you young people have boyfriend crises or crises about hair or..." "No, Mom, most of the girls in my class are having an existentialist crisis." There's so much cynicism amongst our young people. When I was hearing about the magicians just now, I was like, okay, doomsday. And there is need for us to really look at an island state of mind with optimism, with renewed energy, and creative energy to be able to tap the potential of our young people, of all our peoples, to be able to really realize the potential of these island states. Beautiful, unspoiled, idyllic islands amidst the blue Caribbean Sea. And I'm dressed for it. An outfit I actually bought at the Green Market from one of our local entrepreneurs. And I think this really represents for us what we can do as a region, as the Caribbean. So I see limitless possibilities, even amidst the environmental crises, even amidst the adaptation that we have to make for climate change. I see that we can succeed, that there is potential. So limitless possibilities.
Philip.
Okay, but there always has to be one person to bring the whole show down. It always happens, and unfortunately I think it's me. My word is hustling. And it seems to me that the Caribbean is essentially a place of hustling. It's hustling at 3 levels. There's the individual hustling, there's the business hustling, and there's the government or the state hustling. And I'm happy to talk about any of them. But let me start with one example of the earliest kind of hustling at the individual level, which goes back to a story some of you who are as old as me would know. It's a sort of a rum shop kind of story. James Brown was supposed to be coming to play a fete, a big fete, and so the tickets were selling out like hotcakes. James Brown is coming on Saturday. James Brown is coming. We're selling tickets, selling tickets. Of course, Saturday comes and no James Brown. People say, oh, well, that ain't smart. The smartness thing is you're doing it the next month, and then James Brown still ain't coming. That is what I'm talking about. And that is one example of the early kind of individual hustling.
Okay, so now we have 4 words up here. I want the audience to think about their word, because when we get to the question and answer and comment part of this, we would like to hear some more words that describe our island state of mind. The comments clearly show that what we see depends mainly on what we look for. So if you have a certain state of mind and you're looking for certain things, those are the things that you start to see. I would like to say that my word was really diversity and multiculturalism. And for me, that is what the Caribbean truly represents. And I got a little map of the Caribbean, and it was very exciting. We think about the Caribbean islands, but we really don't think about northern South America. We don't think about the Yucatan. We don't think about Florida and Louisiana. So there's a huge Caribbean, and I want to get the panel really started with this quote from Philip's book. This extensive migration requires nothing less than a reconceptualization of the role of the state. He notes that the practices of Caribbean peoples are at great variance from the exclusive claim for a singular loyalty to the state. Can you all hear me over the siren? Caribbean peoples share a common deterritorialized imaginary. This requires a reconceptualization of the notion of sovereignty. And I think this is so interesting because a state of mind is about your imagination, and if your imagination is not tied to a geographical area, you can be a Caribbean person in Toronto, you can be a West Indian person in Brooklyn, you can be a Black British person in London or Brixton, you know, you can be all of those things. And so what does it mean that we don't really hearken to our territory as a reason for how we imagine ourselves? I open it up to all of you. Pick your word.
You said something interesting about, this is a little bit off topic, but you said something interesting about Caribbeanness being more than just the islands. This is about the islands, but sometimes I think in the islands we forget that 115 million people live around the Caribbean Sea. And when you interact with Caribbean people from Central America, from Northern South America, from the Gulf, you realize that they feel very connected to us, but sometimes we forget about them. When you go to Nicaragua, if you go to Colombia, you hear people speaking, you go to Panama, some of them are speaking with Jamaican accents, some of them are speaking with Vincentian accents. And I think, you know, the idea of this statelessness, this floating Caribbeanness needs to be embraced, because as we really begin to understand that, we begin to understand the richness of what we have and the vastness of our assets. And I think that that's something maybe to speak about, the vastness of our assets and the fact that our assets go well beyond the oil, the mining, the physical assets. This cultural Caribbean identity is invaluable. So that's interesting doing, yeah?
Philip? Mhm. Yeah, it's a conversation, don't make it too stiff.
I tend to think about the Caribbean as, yes, there certainly is that element of that international aspect of it, if you like, the diaspora element. And I think for me, one of the key features of the Caribbean, if you like, is a constant, there's like a kind of a dance that goes on between the kind of creolization that we have in the Caribbean, each Caribbean island, and the hunting for that diasporic link, whether it is back to India or to Africa, or to Europe or to China. And we are constantly, I think, moving in that relationship between those two issues, the creolized world that we have created in the Caribbean through the coming together of the range and diversity of whether it's through forced migration or chosen migration, and the things that have come out of that. The newness is the creolization, I would say. But at the same time, there is also a very strong sense of the diasporic link to individual other parts of the world. And I think that for me, if you like, the islandness is involved in that constant, sometimes it's a battle and sometimes it's a dance between those two ideas.
Interesting. Sharifa, you were going to say?
Yes, I was just going to say, it's striking how very similar we are while we're diverse in the Caribbean. And the diversity extends across, ethnicity, language, the works. But when we examine the issues, and we're talking about Caribbean states of mind and how do we realize the potential, we have very similar issues. And we need to leverage our talent that Mark spoke about to be able to address some of these issues in a way that allows us to realize the potential of a region.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my thoughts lie along the line of paradox. And we have such a rich cultural diversity. You see that our own identity, for lack of a better word, is celebrated outside.
Yes.
So people create, I've been to Australia and there are these huge steel band festivals and carnival and goat racing. And I say, I'm seeing this in Australia. I never saw goat racing in Tobago, but here I am seeing it in Australia. And at the same time, I'm seeing Japanese embracing the so many steel bands in Japan playing like crack shots. But I look back in Trinidad and I see that the appreciation that I see outside, and this ability to transform this potential that we have is limited. And why are we limited? Are we limited by our imagination? Because I heard the quote talking about reimagining just outside of this small island state of mind. And I think it does call for a recognition of how we create our own identities. It has to be more than learning maths and English in school, right? Because I think it has to do with how we actually embed our own culture and identity from small. And I think that piece is missing, but even notwithstanding that, and people leave and they go away, and they're away for many years, they're creating, this identity that they miss. So I think of paradox. I think that is from a global perspective.
Can I take up that point, the same point you were making about, that process in Australia and so on. In Carriacou, to turn the thing round, what you have is the Shakespeare Mass, in which Shakespeare is used by teams competing to be able to recite recite me the speech of so-and-so is said. And then, if you can't say this speech completely, you get licks, which is a very traditional Caribbean thing. There's a lot of licks in the Caribbean. And so you have, so it's moving both ways. That's what I would like to add.
I really like what you said, and it's unusual that it sometimes takes people, the third person perspective, to recognize the gold mine we're standing on. We're standing on a gold mine, and it takes the diaspora, it takes somebody who is a second generation Trinidadian away to recognize the real richness and value of what we have here. It takes almost a foreigner sometimes to recognize the pricelessness of our culture and our assets. And it is an issue of pride. It is an issue of how these things are taught and embedded in people from a young age. And we almost, we're standing on this rock, and it's almost like we can't even see it. We're always looking out. And it's kind of sad, and it does limit the possibilities. And you definitely see it in certain things like Carnival. When we present the tourism product, it's what we think people want to see. But when they come, they don't necessarily want to go to only all-inclusive fits. They want to maybe go see a stick fighting in South. They maybe want to go see a Blue Devils in Pyramid. But even our own people, maybe Trinidadians they've never been to Pyramid to see Blue Devils. Exactly. It's crazy, and it has to do with how we embed that pride and recognize that gold. But it's part of being on a tiny island. You can't look down and say, oh, I'm on a rock. You're just always looking out at the sea, at the boats passing, and the islands in the distance. So I think that issue of embedding pride from a young age is something we need to address.
Yeah, there's a validation point that's being made, and I hope all of you are hearing it, when Sharifa said, while we diverse. I love this because she's made what was an adjective into a verb, while we diverse, like how children are now saying how we adult. So while we diverse is very interesting. And then, of course, the original globalization is the paradox, because everybody came here 600 years ago, everybody. And there was an encounter of all the other people who weren't coming in. So there has consistently been an effort to find out where one came from and who one is. So that is what I'm hearing in this conversation right now. Sharifa.
I was just going to add confidence, and Mark, you spoke about, and my other panelists spoke about, people appreciating us after they leave or after several generations. And how do we instill that confidence in ourselves? We belong to a culture where we promote cynicism, sensationalism, where we are crabs in a barrel almost. We pull down. We get pleasure in pulling down people, in looking for the negative, in not celebrating positive as much as we should, in not celebrating the successes. The very young people you spoke about, and you're saying, well, we teach them maths and English. I'm not even sure we teach them that, because if you look at the results of maths and English, it's appalling. I taught for a number of years, and then I ran from the classroom, and I ran somewhere else, and you keep, probably running around, trying to just find a way you could add value. But we need to teach our children, and we need to inspire and nurture that confidence in us as citizens of this, country, as citizens of this region, as citizens of the world, and really to help them to take their place. When we look at the intelligence, the wisdom that our children, display, second to none. We have global leaders, and yet we do not see, we do not, celebrate these leaders. And you talked about talent as well. When we look at the scholarships, when we look at how we nurture, these innate abilities, are we really looking at nurturing these children and promoting the culture, promoting the areas of diversification? I think somebody mentioned diversification. Are we really looking at our economy in the next 20, 30, 50 years? Or are we still based on the traditional areas?
Yeah.
My same 16-year-old wants to be a fashion designer. And my husband was saying, well, you're going to live long enough to mine, huh? I said, no, what kind of old thinking is that? Certainly, that's something that we want to celebrate. And then she's doing a project about it, and I'm like scratching my head, where's the support, the challenges that artists, face? How do we really, engage these children? And we've seen the kind of success and the talent that our country has in creativity and innovation. And how do we nurture these things? We've seen it in energy, we've seen it in the environment, we've seen it in the arts. So I think it's really about that confidence and supporting and nurturing our young people so that they can unleash their potential.
Can I come in on the issue of celebrating the hero as well, and specifically try to link it to the Literature Festival as well, in the sense that, and I also want to link it to my hustling, so I'm coming back to the hustling. And I want to think about Homer's Iliad and Homer's Odyssey, because it seems to me that there is a very interesting choice Homer gives us, and a way of reading those two pieces of literature. In a sense, we are caught between two possible directions. One is to be the upstanding kind of Achilles kind of person, the upstanding hero, the hero who is always going to do the right thing, if you like, and avenge his friend's death and all the rest of it. And on the other hand, of course, you also have Odysseus. And Odysseus is, of course, the smart man. Odysseus is the one who is going to find a way to get through, and getting through. And I raise this in terms of literature and heroes because when I was thinking about, if you think about, for example, Derek Walcott's writing, when Derek Walcott started off his writing as in terms of islands, it was very much for a while about the individual on the beach. The eye identifies the sail, a sail going out, a sail coming in. But after a while, it became increasingly obvious that his interest, he doesn't write very much about Achilles. He writes a lot about Odysseus. And it seems to me that the interest for the artist is not necessarily, you have to have the upstanding person, of course, but very often they're so boring. It's the devious and the person who finds a way of getting through. It's far more interesting, and for me, far more exciting.
Well, it's interesting. I really want to get to Sharifa's point about what do we do and look a little bit at the issues challenging us, but then the protagonists that we are, which is what Philip is talking about. Who are we? I wouldn't use devious. Why don't we use creative? I mean, don't have to be devious in order to get through, but you do have to be creative. And I think that as we look, because I know that this panel is supposed to look a little bit at our place in the global economy. And so who are we as Caribbean people as protagonists in this global economy? I mean, I'm reading the four right now, so I throw it out: Google, Amazon, Apple, and Facebook. And I mean, I'm frightened by the market capitalization of these companies, by the technical skill that they have, by the fact that they're moving from being a platform to being shipping companies and supermarkets, and they're just, it's like the tentacles are moving out. And where is this larger Caribbean in that movement? We need energy to supply these machines so far, but I don't know if that will be forever. So where do we go?
So maybe I'll take the energy perspective now.
Good.
Because we find ourselves at a very precarious point. And there's no doubt that we have to be creative. If we think about being sustainable for the future, we now are at the point where, 5 years ago, the total oil revenue as a percentage of the total revenue was, 33%. In 2017, it was 1.7%. So that's quite a substantial difference to our economy, which is largely dependent on oil and gas, whether we like it or not at this point in time. The gas situation as you would know, we've had a shortage of gas for, the last 7-8 years. That largely has been due to investment that has not happened in time as things deplete. So obviously you find yourself at a point where, you have all these great assets that takes a very long time to replicate. A pointless industry where you now find yourself as a tiny little island being, the top exporters of ammonia and methanol. Some of those plants, are at reduced rates, or some of them are shut down. And here we are trying to find solutions that will solve this issue. Of course, these solutions are not solved overnight, and that's why you see Trinidad now trying to think outside of Trinidad. Yes, we have to produce, a lot of these shallow water fields are already under production, so where is your creativity going to come in? You have to now look at smaller fields that have been left apart, we call it marginal fields here. And if we don't go after it, then we continue to be in shortfall. Or you have to look across the border, like Venezuela, like Grenada, which if we don't do it, then really where we place ourselves is have all these competitive assets that some of the most modern in the world. The LNG assets are some of the most capital efficient assets that exist anywhere in the world, right? The plants that are being built in LNG today to fill the future supply of energy are so much more expensive. But we sit here underutilized. So there's no doubt in the energy world, you see us trying to be creative. Now the paradox of it all is why we continue to try to find sustainable solutions to our energy issues. The world is changing, the world is going on, right? The US has now become an exporter of gas. Who would have thought that? They've been importing our LNG for years, And what has been happening now, Africa, like Mozambique, Ghana, Tanzania, they have large gas finds. They want to build LNG. They want to build up Point Lisas. They are now coming to Trinidad. In fact, Ghana is here now. Right. So they're now coming to Trinidad to say, well, you guys have done this for decades. Let us learn from you. So in a way, the world has become a place where we have to depend on each other. It's become a much smaller place. Yes. And we really need to find, in terms of molecules anyway, and intellectual property to really start new industries. We do have to think differently. We do have to think beyond the borders and jurisdictions of Trinidad and Tobago. So that's the energy story, right? I could talk about the culture side, but I'll stop there.
Yeah.
The word you mentioned the most was assets. And I think coming from an economic perspective, that's looking into the future, that's quite important. And I would challenge people here today to go on the street and ask 5 people, what are the Caribbean's most valuable assets? What is Trinidad's most valuable assets? And most people would be quick to say oil and gas, LNG, maybe manufacturing, things like that. Most people wouldn't say carnival. Most people wouldn't say culture. And what you just said from an economic perspective, from a financial perspective, is that oil is no longer, and natural gas is no longer a real true comparative advantage. Because of shale, you can have a shale field up in 6 weeks, and the price is going to stabilize for gas. You have Mozambique, as you said, emerging. So really and truly, we have to ask ourselves, what is our comparative advantage? That's a really important idea in economics. What differentiates you from everyone else? And there's a reason we're coming back to culture. There's a reason you mentioned Japanese people playing pan. There's a reason that whenever people want to have fun and want to be happy, they think about Caribbean things. They think about festival. They think about carnival. They think about the beach. They think about dance. They think about our music. And it is overdue for us to recognize those as our future. And if we don't begin to think about how we can commercialize those while respecting what they are, then we're not really taking advantage of what differentiates us, what makes us different. And we have to do that going into the future simply because of globalization. What differentiates us?
And what's the difference between extractive and generative? Because extractive is non-renewable, and generative, like carnival and festivals and beach, is at least so far renewable if we don't fill it with plastic in the next 10 years. But yeah, I think the point's valid. Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that our oceans are not filled with plastics yet. I know we've been talking about beverage container bills and so forth. So I wanted to talk about the blue economy and leveraging the blue sea, the Caribbean Sea. If we look at successful countries like Chile and so forth, they have been able to leverage the oceans around them, but not by overfishing, but doing it in a very sustainable way. And they have been able to do something that we've struggled with, the hustling culture, where we have not been able to connect the research institutions with development, with marketing, whether it's tourism, whether it's agriculture, whether it's industry. So if we are to look at the blue economy and we are to connect the dots to get the research institutions, the CARIRIs and so forth, the CARDIs, the international organizations, and to be able to help us to develop some of these industries, and then to have world-class products that we can sell and market these things. We have Export TT, we have a number of government agencies as well. And I think it's important for us to look at that, but to do it in a sustainable fashion. We know with climate change and global warming, our reefs, which would really have, I think most of the fishes live in reefs, and we need to also ensure that those are protected, because they are a valuable source of livelihoods, of entertainment, and we need to do it in a sustainable manner. So while we talk about oil and gas, and yes, we're blessed that we've had oil and gas, we also have to look at doing that in the most efficient way, so that our reduction of fossil fuels. We've signed on to Paris. We've ratified the Paris Agreement, which means that we must cut greenhouse gas emissions by 15% in industry and transport and the energy sector by 2030. How are we going to do that? What's the plan to do that while still growing the economy? And it's really painful in terms of the investment in Point Lisa. I grew up in the Ministry of Finance, and that's in a heyday with methanol and all the ammonia plants and so on, and to see what has happened. And then even our relationship with Venezuela right now, to be able to get the raw material to be able to refine. So I think we need to really look at a plan that helps us to move our economy, and to be more proactive and progressive rather than reactive, because we're just a speck really, and as the economists say, we are price takers. We are vulnerable, very vulnerable to the shocks. Oil price shocks, commodity prices, and we haven't started talking about the hurricanes and the catastrophic hurricanes. And one of the words that I was toying with was resilience, and we can talk about that further.
Can I just also pick up, I was just sort of thinking about, in terms of the shape of this panel, and the talk about, when I say shape, I mean, I'll see what I mean by that in a minute. Basically, I am the small islander here. That's what I mean. And I'm thinking about the Eastern Caribbean, and I'm thinking about Barbados. And so we don't have those tremendous resources. We have, well, not when they come down to Trinidad, but the thing is, though, that so we also have to find a way to survive and find a way of getting through. And one of the ways that has been found, of course, is what is euphemistically called the financial service industry. Well, if that isn't hustling, I don't know what isn't. And the financial service industry is actually the second most important industry, for example, in Barbados. Don't mention Turks and Caicos and other places in terms of the serious money that is there. And basically what we're talking about is places for people to hide their money. That is basically what we're talking about. And that is what we're providing. And we've been doing that for a long time. I think in terms of banking, the Caribbean is about the 4th largest banking area in the world. Now, that is a serious issue. And that has arisen basically because of smartness. You know, you say, well, we are providing an opportunity for people to hide their money. Bring it and we'll hide it for you. That is basically what we've been doing. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything good. I'm not making a value judgment about that. I'm saying that's what's been happening. Obviously, then you can make the value judgments that you want. But then what is happening is that also, of course, other people say, well, you know, the big problem in the Caribbean is not that is happening, is that it's not regulated. I mean, that is what has been thrown out at us. The OECD throw that at us all the time. And so more and more regulations are invented. And so what do we do? You know, having discovered that, is there another area that we can go into? Well, the answer is yes. And that there is this new area, and this new area is selling passports. That's what we do. So now what we do is we say, well, you know, imagine a little country called St. Kitts and Nevis. St. Kitts and Nevis has about 54,000 people. St. Kitts and Nevis have been selling passports since 1980 something. And in the recent years, they have been so successful that they have turned the economy around of St. Kitts and Nevis. It is now, I think, the second most valuable economy in the Caribbean at the moment after the Bahamas. Now that is a serious turnaround. And now if you imagine, and I think one figure I saw was, they don't sort of issue these officially, but my understanding is about 2,000 passports a year are sold. Now imagine you have a country of 53,000 people. You're selling 2,000 new citizens every year. Soon, who is going to be your citizen? And you know, and the citizens are not located in St. Kitts. You can, if you like,
I think
order.
you have to buy property.
Oh yes, of course. You buy property. Yes, there are two conditions. One, well, it varies because it used to be 200, so you have that, and then you can either buy property or you can make a donation to the government, one or the other. But the interesting thing is, what we do in the Caribbean as well is. So St. Kitts has been doing this. Yes, what a great idea. Why don't we in Grenada do that? And then also, why don't Antigua and Barbuda do that, which they are now doing? And then the most recent one that's joined the game is St. Lucia. Dominica has been doing it for a while now. Yes, Dominica also allows you to vote. So you have an interesting thing where the whole concept.
Reverse colonialism.
Well, the whole concept of citizenship, that upstanding thing that you belong to, that you salute the flag, you know, that the place that you're supposed to die for. Well, these folks aren't going to die for you.
Well, we don't know that yet, Philip, but we don't really know that yet. They might get very happy and they might start to love their adopted country. But I really want to pick up on Philip's point about the money and the financial services, because we have global companies. And it's not so much about hiding the money, it's about taking advantage of the different rules in different countries. And all of, you know, in Trinidad, you raised the other very important point that this panel needs to keep not focusing on Trinidad, but think about the wider Caribbean. It is very important. I see Alexander wants to say.
I think Philip is stirring the pot. I think he's stirring the pot, and I really have to challenge what you're saying. You know, we as a Caribbean, we started off very collectivist, and over time, with the influence of North America, we become more about the individual, right? You see that hustling thing on a micro scale. When I'm in Jamaica, when I'm in Trinidad, when I go to the market, when I walk down the street and I see how people dress themselves, how people differentiate themselves, it's beautiful. It's spectacular. But in terms of our leadership, that, in my opinion, is what has brought us down. Our 50 years ago, when we had independence, 60 years ago almost, we were ahead of Singapore. Our leaders were strong, and our leaders, while flawed, were thinking about, by and large, their legacy. They were thinking about how they'll be remembered. And over time, especially with North American influence, it's about the individual. It's about the smart man, particularly in Trinidad. And I have seen as I've moved here, and I really shouldn't be doing this because I'm in diplomacy, I shouldn't be talking about Jamaica and Trinidad, but I'm going to wait until some water right here. As I've moved to Trinidad, I've seen the smart man being the man praised. I've seen people saying, you know what, Mr. FIFA, he gets it done. Yeah, I'm thief a little bit of money, but he gets it done. And the rise of the smart man, particularly in Trinidad, has been what has caused a lot of problems in the economy. It's a little bit different in the small islands, but people say, you know what, if I can hustle and make a quick buck, why work? Why are you working? Why are you cutting grass? You know, I could go and, you know, do this hustle over here and make $1 and I'll be, you know, at the bar at 11 o'clock. So I think the rise of the individual smart man at the level of leadership and the move towards individual gain instead of collectivist has really been what has kind of shot us in the leg in the last, I would say, particularly 30 years. So
A very interesting point. Yes, you're going to get a lot of applause on that because yes, the place where you look. With the panel's permission, I'd like to maybe take. Where is Nikisha? Oh, there you are. So I wonder if we could do a little 10 minutes now and then go back and dig down a little more deeply, especially on migration, because I think that we really have to talk about that in the context of how we can move in the Caribbean. But I know that there were some people who wanted to say something. So please, if you would identify yourself and maybe you'll give us your word too that you think of when you think of the Caribbean.
Yeah, well, my name is Ronald Ramstone. Very interesting panel. Thanks very much. My name is Ronald Ramstone. I'll start with the fact that Mark used the word paradox at least twice.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting here and I agree and in fact compliment those who are doing so well in other countries in all different spheres. Experts, energy companies, IT companies, you name it, we have Trinidad and Tobago citizens, Caribbean citizens doing so very well to help build other companies out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering here, but why did they do it here? What prevents all this expertise that we do indeed have working all over the world, doing great things, yet we have the unemployment problem, the social problem, the crime problem, the economic problems that we now have. So that is engaging my mind at this moment. What is missing? What must we do here? How do we get the expertise that we accept brilliant out there, but for some reason not impacting the Caribbean?
Good question.
Philip, I find the most interesting presenter, maybe because he's not an economist. I don't know. But while he's speaking about the smart man, there's another word he used.
Hustler.
Hustler. And when he goes to offshore banking and the CI, Caribbean Investment Program, CIP, and the way in which he's putting it, it reminds me of the Buccaneers,
Yes.
who used to come from elsewhere and find the Caribbean as a good place to hide. But apparently, we might have learned a lot from the Buccaneers.
We might
I'd like
have.
Philip to talk a bit about that.
Yes. Thank you very much for that, Ronald. There's a couple questions, so Philip, I'll let you
Can
go
I just
first. Yeah.
respond to that? Just very briefly. This is a statement by Jamaica Kincaid when she was interviewed about Antigua. Oh dear, I'll have to
Did
find
you
it.
lose it again?
Yes, this is, I got it. For me, she was interviewed in around 2009. I don't know if those of you remember, but there was this man called Alan Sanford who was very active in the Caribbean. He ran an airline, he started cricket, he did this and that, and he ended up in jail. Now, so Jamaica Kincaid was interviewed soon afterwards for the New Yorker, and this was her statement. In Antigua, there's always a man, a person who comes in from the rest of the world, a pirate. Piracy is very close to Antiguan history. They have been coming and hiding money and stealing for hundreds of years. This man comes to Antigua and corrupts the place, and everyone's happy because they're making money. The ones who aren't benefiting from it, like me, are in the opposition.
Well, yeah. Mark, you want to say something else about that?
No.
No, okay. All right. Mark, yeah, there's lots to answer. Do you want to make the point about why we can't take the talent, which obviously is talent, which we can't use? We already built an LNG plant here. We can't really build another one. So I don't know. We could have shares in the ones in Ghana and Nigeria. I don't know. Mark, address how we take that talent that we have developed over 50 years and bring it back here to solve these other problems.
Well, I'll start by saying, I go to places like Singapore. The taxi driver says, you see that little spot there? That's going to have a tree on it, or that's going to have a building on it in 50 years. And I'm saying, how could a taxi driver at 60-something years old telling me about this spot for a future building or tree 50 years from now? And that means the whole population of Singapore understands where we are going.
Forward movement.
So to me, there is a fundamental issue, to your point, Ronald, in terms of what could be different, having direction, having a clear idea of how we capitalize all the talent, whether it's culture, whether it's energy, and how you want to harness it in a changing world. Okay? So one thing is policy and direction. And let's take policy, for example. I mean, we talk about the fact that we have signed on for COP21, and 15% of your renewables, your power has to be from renewables. Well, we are now in a state where our gas is being used for electricity and we don't get paid for it. That's the state we're in. You look at Chile. Chile in some parts are giving away electricity because they formulated an energy policy 2050. We're now in 2018. And if you go on the net, anybody can read this, they get it down to the whole education system, where everybody understands about what energy really means, and energy conservation and efficiency. Here we are, we fly over Trinidad and we see some nice lights, right, in the stadiums and everything. It looks good. We're using gas that we don't have, right, and we're using it in electricity, which is a poor use of value for Trinidad and Tobago. So renewables is a big area. If you look at the whole global trends, renewable energy will not replace fossil fuels, but at least it will be a large dominant trend over the next years, as we know. Solar, wind, and so on is becoming big in that. And I must say, from the NGC standpoint, the National Energy, which is a subsidiary of NGC, is the one working right now on wind and solar and so on with the Ministry of Energy. I hope we can achieve our objectives, because I think we have no choice, right? Economically, we have no choice but to do this, quite apart from the standards we have agreed on in, by 2021 and so on. So that's one element of it. policy direction. The other thing is, how do we organize ourselves
Exactly.
in this country with limited resources and make better use of the potential we have? NGC cannot go outside of Trinidad and Tobago, in Mozambique and other areas, and Guyana, and talk about NGC. Because in these countries, there's limited infrastructure, they need engineers, they need technicians, and you know what? We've kind of been through that, and we have NESC, and we have MIC, and we have UTT. So really and truly speaking, it's about organizing our resources, our institutions, so that the people who, I mean, we benefit economically from that.
Exactly, like the Cubans.
So I think it needs clearer direction, and it needs a better way of working, chamber to chamber, government to government arrangements. There's no way we could get through with Venezuela, for example, if there wasn't a government-to-government arrangement, heads of agreement between Shell, PDVSA, and NGC, and you work down at committee levels and you get things done. Nothing would happen, right? There's a lot of work going on in that area now. That's just one example. Are we doing it in all other areas? No. Right? So that's hopefully that answers part of the question.
Caroline?
Hi. I can sit, right? Do I have to stand? Okay.
You can stand if you like and tell us who you are.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Oh,
Hi. My name is. Hi. My name is Caroline May. I am an environmental lawyer. I worked in climate change for about 10 years, working with think tanks advising small islands and developing states at UN negotiations. I just moved back to Trinidad not too long ago, so I'm very excited to hear you guys talk. And I want to talk to the two in the middle, to Sharifa and Alexander. And because small islands, the role of small islands, as you very well know, I'm sure most people know, we have been the ones to actually lead us in the negotiations to where we are right now, because we've spearheaded, with the help of the AOSIS, with the help of the EU, Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS, pushing this agenda of lowering, of fixing countries to lower their emissions. And you know, I think that's phenomenal. We're talking about disproportionate impact that Alexander was talking about. I think that is phenomenal. That's something that we should own as a Caribbean and know about as a Caribbean. I don't think that we actually do, from a layman's perspective, I should say. Because we are the canaries in the coal mine. We are the ones at the edge. We're the ones that are going to stand to deal with the hurricanes, the rising sea levels, the rising temperatures affecting agriculture. So I just want to hear what you guys have to say about that. It'd be very interesting.
Talk about AOSIS.
I want to connect what you said to something that Mark was just saying. He was saying that we can take Trinidad and Tobago's experience in oil and gas and use that experience itself as an asset, right? And you can do that in many other things. You can think of it in a very positive sense. You can say, you know, if you want to host a carnival anywhere in the world, you really should be coming to a set of Trinidadian consultants, you know, and we should be exporting those skills the same way we're exporting these oil and gas skills. Now that's positive experience as an asset. In her first statement, Sharifa noted something about climate change. In a strange way, if you look at it carefully, it can be an opportunity, right? We're islands. You can think of us as beakers or test tubes. If you want to create a new technology to hurricane-proof or to flood-proof, really and truly, we should be saying to companies, guess what? Come here, test it out first. If you want to make an entire grid renewable, come here, test it out first. It's the ideal scale. We're facing many impacts. So in a strange way, we have to look at experience, the positive as an asset, but also the possibility of this whole climate change thing as an opportunity. And I think we haven't really looked at it in that regard. So that's my comment to that.
I think in terms of the advocacy that needs to be had, you know, Mark's point about the taxi driver being so attuned to what's going on in the country. And I think that's very important. And while the UNDP has been working with government to try to get advocacy going, I think there's a lot more that needs to be done. That should be the challenge of our generation, all the 16-year-olds who are having the existentialist crises. In fact, I told them that, and soon after, a carbon neutral project started in the school, and the girls, they're all very excited. But I think that's very important to really understand, what does this mean for the Caribbean? What does reducing emissions mean? How do we get into renewable energy, initiatives? And also to be able to come up with the plan of action to be able to implement some of these, areas. I recently participated in a hackathon in St. Martin, which of course, as you know, was hit by Irma. About $1 billion in losses. Most of their tourism infrastructure is gone. The economy is really under severe stress, and it's in a state of building back better. And during that hackathon, there were about 20 groups of mainly young people who were looking at how do you build back better to be more resilient. And the same point you're talking about being test tubes, some of the ideas were building structures that could withstand the catastrophic hurricanes that will come again, and to be able to look at using geothermal energy, being able to look at waves, being able to look at different types of sustainable energy solutions to be able to treat with it. And I think these are some of the areas we need to look at as a region to be able to really address some of these issues. But I think the biggest thing is really having that vision that has to be integrated in terms of sustainable development, and to be able to ensure that we understand what does the reduction of 15% of emissions greenhouse gases mean. Do we look at fuel cost pricing? Mark talked about the lights in the stadium and so on. All the big tall buildings, in the past in the night looks pretty, but who's paying for that? We're subsidizing a lot of our utilities. We need to start talking about that. If people don't feel, they're not going to take off the lights. So, and of course, that's a political economy argument. But I think it really comes back to us starting with that advocacy to understand climate action. What does this mean for this country? And partnering with those who are of like mind. I just want to make one comment on Ronald's point, though he said he didn't like economists. But you asked about how come people are appreciated elsewhere, really, and not here. And it comes back to us valuing our own, and a word, meritocracy. We spoke about leadership. We don't understand what meritocracy is. We don't understand what it is to put the right people in the right jobs. Because of our diversity, maybe. Sometimes it's divide and rule, but do we really have the right people in the right positions to do the strategic planning, to do the implementation, to get the job done? And that's something we need to think about.
Yeah, I think, Sharifa's point, go ahead, please.
Okay, I'm Saran Pravat, educator, and I'm going to address our sense of pride and the words we use when we speak of one another. Now, we're a neo-colonial space here, and we love to follow what other people do. I think if we start and think of our education here, we will realize that what we're doing is setting up ourselves. My daughter's in London, and her children go to school in their district, straight through. In Trinidad, we have types of schools. And if you're going to that type of school, you've practically failed before you're 13 years old. That's what you think. And of course, our sense of pride, it's in our mind. It's in what we think. And if we think we're failures, it's realized. Now, I've noticed that when we go abroad and we meet other people, we kind of realize we're brighter than them. When Trinis go to London, to Toronto, to New York, and they look around, we're bright. You might have gone to junior secondary school, but when you reach there, you're bright. And we do well because at that point, we get a sense of pride in the Caribbean, pride in ourselves, and we go forward. But when we hear, even when we're doing well, you think she do well? I know that girl from small, she ain't really nothing. We use the words to demean ourselves. And even when we are successful, against all the odds, because as you say, our meritocracy gets stymied by our tricky-dadiness. There was a case where a Trinidadian got a scholarship in telephone technology, came back, was passing files, nothing to do with that. During his vacation, Barbados hired him and his colleagues to organize their telephone system some good years past. Wonderful telephone system. So, and then they came back to pass files around. So we are doing this to ourselves by not recognizing how wonderful we are, how wonderful our children are, how wonderful those who are studying are. We don't praise ourselves. I was looking even to our gold medals. We didn't praise ourselves. We look for something bad, or what we thought was bad. It's our minds. It's our minds. And we push that, we pained each other. Why? So to change that, what we need to do is to strive to be fair in our education system, in our selection of the persons, as you were saying earlier, and in using the words to one another that would make our minds be uplifted as Trinidadians and Caribbean people. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I see there were a couple other people. Why don't they, I'm going to take 3 more, and then I want to have us, 4, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Mm-hmm.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I wanted to
identify yourself for us, please.
Okay, sure. I'm Rhonda Garcia. I'm an administrative consultant and speculative fiction author. So 2 words that came to mind when I was sitting here was transition and, honestly, future. Because what I see as a problem is the basic lack of acknowledgement that we have, that we are in a period of intense global transition. And as part of that transition, everyone, including these islands, anywhere, no matter how small your society may be or how large, is questioning how, what, where, why, where are we going and why, what do we want? And the Caribbean needs to do more of that, as far as I'm concerned. Initially, as we mentioned, we came through a sort of collective system where we sat down, having been forward throughout whatever method, having thrown off the yoke of colonialism. We, in each society, came together and said, okay, what do we want to do? We want independence. What do we want to do? We want unions. What do we want to do? We want to govern ourselves. And we formed around those principles. And since then, I don't think we've really sat down and asked ourselves where we go from there. We sort of settled into this uneasy stagnation where you both vilify and praise the thing that was above you for so long, the thing that you were shaped in, the society and the rules and the traditions that other people gave to us as a means of figuring out law and order. And we sat down and we accepted this, and for the most part decided, okay, we're going to do this, that, and that. And since then, we haven't actually figured out who we are and what we want as a society and as a region. And when we made some attempt to do that, which I think for me the biggest example was the Federation, it fell apart because nobody was willing to admit that we're still holding on to what was before. And we didn't really have a plan for the future. We didn't want to think about that because we were still trying to deal with the present. The reality is this: we are always in transition. We are not here to create a permanent state, a stagnation. We are literally holding things in trust for those who are already here or who are going to come after. And so I think the most important thing we need to do is stop looking at it piecemeal in terms of, okay, well, we have climate issues, so we have to deal with the climate issues. We have political issues, so we have to deal with the political issues. No, it's all part of an inability, or quite frankly, a refusal to ask, each one of us, ask ourselves, what do we want? As a society, I think if you ask anybody, they know what they'd like to see. Infrastructure, a government that is responsive to their actual needs, specific things like being able to go into a government office and get served immediately, being able to sign up for electricity and get connected within the week, being able to go to your political representative and actually talk to your political representative in his actual space, and then have him go to parliament and talk about what it is his people in his area spoke to him about, rather than something that he thinks will get him back in power in 4 years. And I think that if we are going to look at future, and we have to recognize that the best way to do that is to allow these same young people who are going to be stuck with whatever we do now to actually create influence and think about what they want. Because we, caught in transition, are afraid of the transition, are afraid of change. Transition makes people fearful. And we cling to things we know or think we understand in the wake of that. When the truth is, what we need to do is let go of that. Think about what's important to us as a society. Think about what we need that isn't here. Think about why we don't feel proud when we look around. And then do the thing that will make us proud. Do the thing that will make us feel that we've achieved that future that we're supposed to be holding in trust.
Thank you very much.
I think both of you all just spoke to something that we generally avoid in the Caribbean and we no longer teach, which is what is our underlying philosophy? Why do we not discuss philosophy with our children? What is our underlying Caribbean philosophy? And it's a very important question that people are not asking or exploring anymore.
I'm going to take this person, and there was, one person here, and then we're going to talk a little bit more up here.
My name is Annalie Davis. I'm a visual artist based in Barbados. I wanted to build on Alexander's statement about the rise of the individual smart man. At the level of leadership, the Prime Minister of my country and the opposition are advocating for people to buy and sell votes in our upcoming elections. So there is a real crisis of leadership in the Caribbean, and I don't think we can depend on the state to bail us out of the situation that we're currently in. Given that this is a panel about island futures, I wanted to know if, and I think Alexander is the only person on the panel that's working with a Caribbean association, where do you see hope? Because Irma and Maria solidified in a moment of crisis that we have to function as a Caribbean space. Where is the hope across the region where we're working in an intra-Caribbean way that reaffirms of being Caribbean people? Where is the hope for the future of these islands? Where is that being manifested right now in policy? Where is it actively happening to shape a future collectively? We cannot do this as island nations.
Let me get that one last question. Okay, a great question, Annalise. The gentleman right there, and then we're going to let the panel respond.
Okay, good morning. My name is Jalaluddin Khan. My background is in environmental management and planning, and I'm also a reader. First, a comment and a question. I'll be very brief. One, in terms of the comment about the Caribbean space, I just want to remind both the audience and also our panelists in our statements being made that we are living in a new Caribbean. There's an older civilization of the Caribbean that we have to remember. And we hear about immigrants coming in, but we met a space with peoples here, our indigenous peoples, the cultures, technologies, etc. So please recognize and infuse that in your thinking and thought. The second is a comment, also the question to raise about victimhood. overall we're hearing about dysfunctions and dysfunction in governance or administrations and how to move forward in terms of strategic ways moving forward. I'd like to throw towards the panel about design thinking, about management thinking, about ownership of self-governance. Because what's important, and through being a literary festival, all our artists speak about it, in terms of taking control or responsibility for oneself as an individual, a political system, and also leadership. So the whole question of vision and development planning, etc., I want to throw it back about how the education system functions, and how the education functions to empower ourselves, and also the politics of power in the Caribbean is used to either not develop or to control a few, while a minority control a few, while the majority is not moving forward. Thank you.
Well, as you can see, we have a very good audience. Many of them should be up here on the panel. They're quite provocative questions, and I would like for the panel to try to focus in on the education that would allow people to be agents for their own future, and then pick up on whether that can give us hope, because I think that's the question that they're asking of us. And, you know, is this a hopeful time? Can we make it more hopeful?
Well, first, Annalie, you put me on the spot because I am here as Alexander Girvan, environmental economist, not Alexander Girvan, program coordinator of the Caribbean Sea. So, you know, no invitation was sent to the ACS, and if my boss sees this, I may be in trouble. But there's a lot of hope out there. The question was asked before about the people that the people that could come back, and young people, and I definitely see amongst my generation a hunger awakening in first, second, third generation, children of Caribbean peoples in the diaspora. And I see them coming back, especially when it comes to creative industries. So I think, in the next, 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a benefit to be reaped of those people coming back. So there's definitely a lot of hope there. On environmental issues, the problems are shared. Climate change problems are basically the same across all the islands. And within our cohort of environmental diplomats, you actually see us working pretty well. The 1.5 to stay alive thing, everybody knew about that. And that was pushed by SIDS globally, but it was really the Caribbean SIDS that had a huge, huge hand in that. And Caroline can probably speak to that very, very well. So there is some hope there. This event, this platform, gives me a lot of hope. When I see how Bocas has transformed, the amount of people that fly in for this festival. It recently won an award from Penguin, I think, one of the most top 20 literary festivals in the world. These events certainly give me hope. So I think there's a lot of hope to be had, and we have to be optimistic. Because if you're not optimistic, you exclude a lot of possibilities that are just outside your reach, but can be made possible. So there's a lot of hope to be had. I'm sorry, I didn't follow the moderator's instructions. I just answered your question.
No, that's good. That's good. Mark, we'll work our way down.
Yeah, I guess I want to speak to the topic of identity, which I started off talking, and I think it was raised a couple times here. And the question was, how do we design our way out of it? One thing is the education system. The other thing is what can companies do? Because there's not everything happening in the education system. And the NGC has tried to connect dots here. And I think it's some of the sports people coming out of the good work of Miles in the back there, hiding quite quietly. I mean, he's the one, like leading the Right on Track, NAAA programs and so on, and out of which you get these kind of, world-class athletes. And then you have this nourishment going on at the, Bocas Lit and Sandfest and so on, and you get all these writers coming out on the world stage. So some of it doesn't have to be all in the education system. Sure. Some of it could be how we actually focus and get the talent that I started off with harnessed. I just want to delve a little bit on the on a pan world a little bit, given my strong addiction to that area. but in the pan world, here we are, having invented this instrument here in Trinidad and Tobago. But at the same time, the tuners are going away. Ellie Manet, one of the father of the instrument here, is in West Virginia teaching tuners in the States. And pretty soon, the whole world of tuning is going to change globally, right? So unless we have the institutions that really say, this is an important local expertise for the instrument design right here, and we are learning and writing and forging patents, and have you seen a patent that is papers written on this topic coming from Trinidad and Tobago? Not very often. There's from Germany, there's from the States, and so on. So our own instrument is having dissertations and things all over the world, but we lack it. And it gets back to the point being made that unless we recognize our own
worth,
value,
yes.
identity, unless you learn these things in school. I mean, why is it that we have so many of our so-called icons in society, really sometimes feeling ignored? And they're not utilized in the same education system where we should be learning about what they went through, because soon enough they're not going to be around. And where's the website or museum that really tells the whole story about our evolution and so on and so on and so on. So this gets to the heart of the issue. What are we valuing here? And I'm moving away from energy deliberately, and I'm going straight to the culture of our country. And here we are, where it's appreciated so much outside. And when you look deep down under the surface in Trinidad, what can we point to, right? Yeah. Where's the education on these while our tuners disappear and so on? So it's happening. I'm not saying there's not work in this area. There's some work going on in MIC and various areas. But to me, after, I guess, some decades, I would have liked to see a dedicated institution teaching acoustics, material sciences, innovations, and all of these things, which I don't see. And I see a lot more happening outside of Trinidad and Tobago, unfortunately. So that's an example of kind of like bringing this topic, the real one.
Yep. Island States of Mind. We've exported something and people have loved it, and they have taken it and developed it in a way that we have not. Sharifa?
I was just,
we
really
have 20 more
pained
minutes,
to hear
so
the question from the back, I think the educator and then the lady behind, in terms of the structures that we continue to perpetuate, that constrain us. And do we need some disruption? Maybe that's not a word I should be using, but disruption technology, disruptive technology. Do we need some disruption to really change that? Or are we continuing with the same analysis paralysis, with the same structures that we meet, as a Caribbean community, and we tick boxes, and we have decisions that take forever to be implemented? Somebody was telling us yesterday, I think, about we were meeting with doctors and trying to look at procurement reform, and they were saying, yes, we're evaluating this for 15 years now, and the machine only lasts for 5 years, and there is no maintenance plan. So we have an Office of Procurement Regulator, and then what? So I think it's really about thinking deeply about these structures and the way that these structures really constrain us rather than unleash our potential. The educators spoke about young people and the scholars who we bring them back because we have them sign a contract. And yet what do? Nothing. We have them photocopying documents. We have brilliant young people coming back with, we've invested millions of dollars, open scholarships, and yet they can't find jobs. And if they do find a job, because we have to catch them quickly, right, the hustlers, we have to just give them something. There is no mentorship, there is no guidance, there's frustration in these young people. The cement, so whilst this is all hopeful, and Vicki had a conference recently on engagement, rather. It wasn't a conference. She's not into rigid structures, and that's what I like about her, where we had civil society and private sector coming together. Brilliant ideas. One of the ideas is actually that cultural center. On a weekend, what do we do? Go to movie town with our children, what else is there to do? For those of us who've lived abroad, there are so many opportunities, so many things. Do we have a space where we can go and look at the pan, where we can teach, we have the tourists go and learn to play. We've been talking about these things, but nothing is happening. So whilst this is great, we have the ideas and so on, and the talk shops, when are we going to close that implementation deficit? How are we going to glue all that is going on together? From the academics, from the private sector, the education sector, we need to have, and we have the vision, but do we know anything about the visions in our own countries? And I don't want to be territorial and just talk about Trinidad and Tobago, right? We hear visions and we just use them in a speech. So yes, we have a vision, there's a document here. But are we really living that vision? Do we know that vision like the taxi driver? Who is going to bring all of it together for us to move forward? Otherwise, I'm sorry, we're going to be going around in circles. But I'm an eternal optimist, so I really would like us to, out of this, to challenge all of us, to let us come up with some kind of structure, because we can't keep with the victimhood and blaming the politicians, and they have a lot to be blamed for, or diversity, or other, or look for other persons and structures to blame. And we need to find ways to fix this and to fix it now. Our very survival depends on that.
Can I just add a brief sort of comment, really, which is that it strikes me that I'm a very sort of old-fashioned regionalist, and in the sense that it seems to me that one of the obstacles that we face is to do with an extreme sense of island sovereignty. And until we find a way to get around that, we are constantly coming up against this problem. That the regional element just does not really get enough of a look in. And that gets in the way of so many things and for me, it's essential for the region actually to develop. Then the other aspect is to take it back to the smallest scale, is to do with imagination in education. And I find that so much of it is still extremely rote-oriented. And until we get over that rote situation, I can't really see there's scope, of course, for imagination, but it has to be developed, and it can be taught. There are people who can teach or encourage people to use their imagination, and I think that's absolutely essential. And then problems can get solved. But for me, those two areas, both in terms of the overall structure and in terms of that immediate education issue, are things that need fixing.
Well, I'd like to bring us
a tiny thing. I just wanted to add to the hope in regionalism, mainly because one of my bosses here is the Cuban ambassador, and I wanted to just make a shameless plug for a movie they're hosting called Gauma, Entre el Mar y la Montaña, Guma, between the sea and the mountain. And there's really a lot of possibility for us in terms of learning from each other, particularly from countries like Cuba. So I just wanted to make a shameless plug there.
That's not a shameless plug. It's a uplifting plug. Why don't you give us a little bit more information? It's in the program, so you're going to be able to find it. We have 15 minutes left, and I really want to pick up on the comments that came from the audience, especially about the idea of design thinking. Because what I've heard from the panel is this amorphous we, And I don't know who those Caribbean regional leaders are that would allow us to be like the man in the taxi in Singapore, who have articulated a vision for where we should be thinking as a region. And I think that the young woman who spoke about transition, I think this point is very important. It's one that I've often made. We live in a world of change. We heard that change is the only constant. So if we are building structures, or if we are trying to figure out pathways that deal with something which is like the Caribbean Sea, we have to deal with the structures in the same way we deal with a boat. There are waves, there are currents, there are things that are changing, but we tend to build for solid land. And that's not what we're on, and therefore we always get stymied when it breaks down. I just want to throw that out. And it's my prerogative as chair to tell you the little story of the little girl who came to the green market, and she was in the bunny hop with a parent or grandparent, and she didn't understand an instruction. And the person called her stupid, a set of other names, and the child was so flustered, and I myself intervened and said, please don't ever call her that again. But she didn't. I said, don't ever call her that. So you have to understand where we are in terms of not school, but home and parents and other people, because the denigration is pretty constant. The denigration is pretty constant. So here we are, island states of mind, surrounded by water, filled with talent, having a disproportionate impact on the rest of the world through our diaspora, filled with limitless possibilities, having an amazing ability to hustle. There was a song called Do the Hustle. I remember that song. It was a really nice song. It had a little tweet, tweet, tweet. I can't sing, but it was not so much of a negative. It was an ability to shift. It was an ability to move. It was an ability to be resilient, but once again, we internalize the message on the negative side as opposed to maybe the positive side. I'd like to, are there any burning comments, questions from out in our expert audience? Good. Magic, go right ahead. Okay, we have 10 minutes. Is there a mic for this young lady? Good, it's coming.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Rayanne Paris. I am a Bocas Lit Fest youth blogger, as well as a UE student. So listening to the panel today was really enlightening, but I also have some comments as well as questions that I would like to direct to the panelists. I was wondering, being a double major in biochemistry, to Mr. Mark, about using our garbage, because I know we generate a lot of waste in Trinidad and Tobago. So I wanted to know, what is the possibility of using this waste to generate energy, I mean, in terms of electricity as well, because it can be done, as well as exporting our garbage, because I know, I think it is Switzerland or one of these countries in the UK, they export their garbage to help their recycle plants to keep running, because they have one of the lowest garbage rates in the world. I think it's below 1% of their households actually produce garbage. So they want to know, so I'd like to know, what is the possibility of us, exporting our waste to them to help them run their recycling plants, because it can come at a cost which will generate our revenue, yeah? So that's one question. And the second question, no, not the second question, the second point that I'd like to make is in terms of successive planning. In Trinidad, we have that issue in that most of the institutions that we go to, it's more of a drop us here and we learn to swim, and then eventually when we learn to swim, we learn how to do our jobs properly, and then that's it. There is no real transitioning period, as one of our commentators made in the back. It's more of I'd say being a survivor of the education system, I can really see. I'll get back to that, why I say
You
that.
may not have survived yet.
But I say this because having been exposed to different internships, I mean, you're an intern, you do the small stuff, but no one really teaches you how to do the big stuff. How do you learn to lead? How do you learn to become a minister? How do you learn to be an ambassador? How do you learn to be the president of a company? How do you learn these things if they're not taught? Yeah? There are no programs, there aren't any programs that actually help you transition into these periods. They send you on training workshops, as I understand, because I'm not formally employed. But they send you on training workshops, and then you come back with all the head knowledge, but what about the practical skill? Yeah?
Very good question.
And then in terms of...
Okay, you're going to get just a little bit more time because I do have to wrap it up.
Oh,
so I
okay.
wanted your question to come in beforehand.
Okay.
Okay,
Well,
so...
all right. I'll stop there then.
You'll stop there?
Yeah.
Okay, you can't make it, you can make it short if it's
Oh.
just a question so they can answer.
Okay, just 2 more points in terms of the cultural centers and the ministry and our president's, well, former president's suggestion of having a Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation. I think that's something that we can push for in the future.
Thank you very much. Okay. Leadership, I think, out of all the things that this young student said, I mean, how do we learn to lead? How do we help our leaders lead? And let's have your closing thoughts on this island state of mind.
I think those are excellent points raised. Leadership is always one of the intangible issues that, you don't get taught in school. And the thing about it is, as I've joined and worked in several companies all over the world, whether it's in France or Italy or Germany or wherever, the issue that we're always dealing with is one of getting the right leaders in the right positions, right? And there's always if there's one niche of business that is going on in Trinidad and anywhere in the world, is leadership development, right? So no one teaches you how you forge direction, and far less what direction to forge. And leadership starts with knowing where you want to go. And a big part of leadership is how to get everyone there. And no one teaches you that. So how do you get somewhere, everyone with some direction in your mind, NGC was always a company that, had very long contracts, 20 years, relatively cheap pricing. And that world has changed now. It's turned upside down. There's short contracts, there's high pricing, and we're now negotiating all the contracts in the industry. And therefore, the whole ability of resources, institutional capacity, that is now, we've never had to do this before. So all of a sudden, we are faced with having to hire people, train people, and that's a challenge that I see. I go to many meetings, and here it is that all the meetings have retirees.
Yep.
Where are the young people that, that somebody spoke about, all the scholarship people that we have. So I think the importance of knowing direction and how you want to get there and what resources you need to get there is always a question that is relevant for governments, for companies, for individual firms and everything else. And that is a continued challenge for us. But it all starts with knowing where you want to go.
All right, we have 5 minutes. I'm going to be very brief and speak to the leadership issue as well. A big problem that we face in the Caribbean is that we rely on individuals. We rely on individual personalities. So when you see the departure of a leader in a big organization, the entire thing is topsy-turvy. Why is that? And why are leaders not rising, the young people not rising? It has a lot to do with our frameworks and processes. We don't necessarily in our culture rely on framework and processes as much. If you go to the Germanys, if you go to these other places, there are systems in place. So you may come with your own individual style, but you're still operating within a system and you're still being groomed within that framework. And here we rely too much on individual personality, and I think that is a weakness of a lot of our systems. just to tie up, this is the last time I'm going to speak because we have 5 more minutes. I would really like to congratulate the festival. It really does give me a lot of hope. And as well, you, Mark, for having the vision to sponsor something like this. To you and the other sponsors, I think, really, a lot of respect. And it really does give me a lot of hope that we're able to have these discussions with, a chairman of a NGC. It's really quite fascinating, and it does give me some hope. So thank you all very much.
Sharifa?
I'm sorry we did not have time to really get into the design thinking and how we change the way we think and educate our children. And I think one of the major things we need to really look at as a country is the way we do the rote teaching, the SCA exams and whatever it's, nomenclatures across the Caribbean. And perhaps lead a charge to stop that. It robs children of their childhood, and it robs children of thinking capacity. And I think we need to start by doing some of these things. The succession planning will come along. Life skills is something we don't teach. We haven't really spoken about the family and the role of parents, the role of communities, the role of our villages raising children. And life skills. Yes. Again, and the flip-flopping of policy. So I think those are things that are very critical in terms of how we teach. Civics was something that was taught in the past. And how do we really bring these values? Because we can have the materialistic, gains and so on. But if we don't have our basic values as a society. This morning I was listening to Goldalee Bruce. There's something circulating on social media, speech. And she was talking about things like gratitude, being humble, sincerity. And these are values that we don't really learn in school. And we learn these things probably in our homes, in kindergarten, in our communities. So how do we get back those values?
Thank you. Philip.
So I can go back to Derek Walcott again. Walcott said that Caribbean society is a performance society. People stand up, and what we do is we show. We do a lot of performing. And I think that there becomes a problem with that, because if the focus then is on you all the time, one of the issues about leadership is, when do you decide to give somebody else a chance?
Mm-hmm. Very good point. So I would like for all of those in the audience to put their hands together and to thank our panelists. I think it's been a very rich discussion. Lots of applause. Panelists, you can applaud the audience too. I'd like to thank Deneka for starting us off with the notion of magic, because I think that a lot of the leadership, there is a little bit of magic to leadership and how you get people to follow along with you and think it's their own idea, because that's really what it's about. We have to make people think it's their own idea so they own it and move forward. And as everyone has said, we'd like to thank Marina for being persistent.
Please just give Vicki Assevero a huge round of applause. I want to thank Vicki very, very much, because we asked her to do this, and I know she put a lot of work into it. And I want to thank all of you again for taking part. And I want to say that this morning, this Thursday morning session is a first, and it's for us a very important session, because it sort of sets the tone for the rest of the festival. So I think you've done a wonderful job. Thank you very, very much. What we're going to do now, as Nicholas said in the beginning, is we carry this Island's Life theme through the festival. And I want to invite all of you to join us on the arcade over there and on the Comedy Street, where 2 extempo masters, Myron B, who's the reigning champion. This is a form of calypso. It's our funny way, our really wry way of making comments about really important issues. And Myron B and Black Sage, who went with us, and Jacob Ross went with us to Edinburgh. We took it to the Edinburgh Festival. It was a huge hit. They all love extempo. People were going to come here because they went there. So they went there free of charge.
and they're going to be following along the Islands Night theme. I enjoyed it. It's great fun. And in your programs, you'll see there are a few more of these sorts of discussions coming up, and lots of fabulous writers. So come and hear some music and carry on. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, I forgot to say that there's this book here. This book. Which books are available for sale.
It's a really brilliant book. It's very short too, but it's really brilliant. Oh, this is your copy.